Good evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. I'm your host and moderator, Carol. This is our panel. We have Soraya, Selvi, Kamini, Hazana, and Kyra, and we have Amina in the back room. So last week, I spoke about a young lady, not a young lady anymore, but about a friend of mine who was afforded the worst indignities you can imagine, was brutalized by her husband. And how she overcame this whole thing to bring up 3 wonderful children who into adults, and how she's doing so well today. But what I didn't tell you is that her ex-husband, who is a diabetic, who has lost most of his toes, who's remarried, twice after her, she still looks after him financially. This is absolutely amazing that somebody could be so forgiving of somebody who brutalized her for years, took her children away from her and she had to go to court to get them back. She did everything wrong, She tried to take her dignity away from her in many ways. And she was so forgiving, and she still sends him money for his upkeep. And, when I asked her, hey, why are you doing this? It's about time he grew up. And she said, no, his wife writes and says they don't have money for a living. And so she still supports this dude, right? So this brings me to today's topic: why Sri Lanka needs to heal and how women can lead the way. And with this, I reach out to Soraya. Soraya works to empowering women. And she works with community. She's a leader in community organization. She has done these interfaith groups. She's a leader of an interfaith group. She started the first women's mosque with others in LA. All these women on this panel, they are multifaceted. And every week, I try to address another side of their facets, so you understand why they are experienced enough to speak to different issues, right? And so we are not boasting about each other. We are just saying how wonderful these women are and how capable they are to talk about a certain subject. So Soraya is she wants to talk about, she says, one of the greatest contributions we can make to Sri Lanka today is to be able to heal and forgive. Very profound. Soraya?
Thank you, Carol. What I want to also share with the audience is something about Carol. She's a social and environmental activist. She builds homes, guys. She builds homes for women-led households. And I think she's built over 15 homes now. And she's the co-founder of WIN, and she promotes gender equality through sports. So yes, as Carol mentioned, one of the greatest contributions, the biggest gift we Sri Lankans can give to our country is the power and the ability to heal and forgive. Look at what is happening around us. Today in the Muslim community, there's a lot of grievance, burial rights, or whether to cremate. Look at the country at large, the majority of the people so angry with the Easter Sunday bombings. And then there's the war in the north, and the terrorists and the insurgency in the south. We are a country, pardon me for saying this, but we are in a cesspit of hurt, and we have to come out of this. And why we as a team, we picked this topic to be why women should lead the way. And if you listen to Carol's story, here was a woman who was abused, who was treated in the most inhumane way, but now she helps her husband in the time of need. I think this is the power and the capacity, the feminine energy, the women in us, we can bring to our world. Now, I don't by any means say that this is easy, because healing and forgiveness go hand in hand, and it takes a lot of practice, lot of effort, lot of commitment, and my friends, above all, tons and tons of love. Love is critical. So as Sri Lankans, let us lay this as a foundational value and focus on how we can, through healing our communities, healing ourselves, how can we promote national unity? So we just 3 minutes to go. One of the greatest impediments to healing, I don't know, if you were in an interactive session, I would love to harvest from you. But just to tell you, in my experience, one of the greatest impediments for healing is memory. Memory is our greatest enemy. It is like a record player that keeps playing. Oh, so-and-so did that. So-and-so did this. I'm hurt. I'm angry. So let us not forget, the brain is one of the largest organs. It's like a reservoir of memory. It just keeps playing this record. So there has to be ways and means in which we have to be present and not indulge in so much of thought and memory. So remembering that, am I moving forward, looking at a vision with the future, or am I going backwards, carrying forward a memory? That's my time. So this is a critical question to ask. And this journey has to begin in our homes. The language we use, the stories we tell our children. Is it one of love? Is it one of compassion? So this is the call for women of today, women of Lanka, that we make a concerted, committed effort to heal and to forgive. Thank you, Carol.
So thanks, Soraya. I mean, that's what you call wounds to wisdom. I mean, I think female energy and the female attitude towards some of this forgiveness is more inculcated in our, I don't know, being. Anyway, more of that later. Selvi works closely with conflict-affected people from during the war to now. She is also a guest artist with Stagers Group, which is a drama production company. Selvi, many sides to you. So Selvi wants to talk about denied history and Sri Lanka's wounds. Selvi, over to you. Selvi, unmute.
With your permission, I'd like to go into some personal anecdotes. At a drama event with the Stagers Group company at one of the universities in the Western Province last year, we dealt with the fallouts of the Black July events and the 1983 Black July events and the final phases of the war. After the event was finished, we were confronted by a group of undergrads who were distressed and angry. They were not aware of any of the events discussed. Our youth have been denied their own history. Naturally, the narratives in the history books in schools stop at 1948. And nobody discusses these kind of events which are very embarrassing for them. And so the youth, they don't know what happened before them. The second one, I was 12 years old when the All Island riots broke out against the Tamil community in 1958. Our house was full of distressed, injured, disheveled, and displaced people whose houses were either burnt or destroyed. We had almost 62 people at our home at one time, all of them looking to my parents for guidance. It was emergency rule and 24-hour curfew. We lived on milk, rice, and pulsambol for 4 weeks. Fortunately, we had bags of rice from our farm up north. The violence was against the Tamil businesses and the citizens. The wounds of these events still haunt the older Tamil people and have been passed on to their children. The third, the anti-Tamil riots of 1977. I remember my father campaigning for peace and calm during that time. To our dismay and worry, he would walk out between spats of violence campaigning. In 1981, we saw the burning of the Jaffna Library, also riots against the plantation Tamils this time. Many plantation Tamils were thrown out of their estates. Tamil academics, on the other hand, are still healing from the loss of heritage of 100,000 rare old books in the Jaffna Library. And then the Black July of 1983. island-wide riots against the Tamil population in retaliation for the LTTE killings. My sister Shanti, who faced it in Colombo, had harrowing tales, too long to narrate here. But what was striking to me was her account of her till then a friendly neighbor, Mr. Fernando, dancing and pirouetting, clapping his hands, saying Tamils deserve it, Tamils deserve it, when he heard the riots had begun. Subsequently, there were more localized riots in 1987 and 1997. But the neighbor dancing like that, Tamils deserve it, it hurt real deep. The year 2001 and 2002 brought in a twist. This time, the riots were against the Muslim community. We saw Mavanalla, Beruala torn apart. And in 2014, the Kaluthura district, followed by anti-Muslim riots in 2018, and most recently, the retaliation after the Easter bombings. These are fresh and open wounds in the hearts and minds of people. At one point in the past, the international press referred to Sri Lanka as the killing fields. Youth were mowed down in the south in thousands during the JVP uprising in 1971. Whole villages thought to be rebellious were burnt down. I attended a protest rally at Vihara Mahadevi Park, at which a Buddhist priest emotionally spoke of the Jaffna library fire, which has now spread to the whole island and burning in the south. Now the ninth one. I was in Colombo for the central bank bomb exploded. LTT bombs and killings of people as retaliation against the government left many people, many families fractured and desolate. Have they come to terms with what was meted out to them? Then we have the paramilitaries and their atrocities throughout the country during the war period. Innocent civilians. They had to deal with that. Another twist in this tale is the sequence of murders of politicians and army personnel, starting from SWRD Bandaranaike. There was Thurayappa, Kobbekaduwa, Athulat Mudali, Premadasa, Disanayaka, Tiruchelvam, Amritalingam, and many more. Names of the journalists who were killed like Lasantha and Ekneligoda, and so on, add to the collective trauma of Sri Lankan people. The death of the dramatist Richard de Souza is etched in the gentle psyche of Sri Lanka. I personally know some of their families who are still grieving and who still don't know who was responsible and accountable for these spate of murders. These events have left deep scars in the family members, which are even now affecting their private and political lives. People cannot now forget the white van killings, the fear that associated with it. Then we had the tsunami. Tsunami took away lives and lands of people ruthlessly. I was administering relief to the affected, devastated people on the 28th of December in 2004 in Batikalo and Kilinochi. I had accompanied Muttaya Muralidharan, who was the then Goodwill Ambassador for WFP, World Food Program. The people were glad to see the hopeless and dumbstruck people in the camps became animated with his presence, and the smiles came up on their faces. Now, war against the LTT finally hit the climax in 2009. Last phases of the war in Mullaibakal saw thousands dead and many more injured. The families of the disappeared are still waiting for news of their loved ones. There are more than 89,000 female-headed households in the north and east that find it difficult to make ends meet. Former cadres, although rehabilitated, have not been able to find new lives due to stigma and for lack of livelihoods. In the south, there are disabled soldiers and families who are trying to find their way around. Many female-headed households there too. Spate of violence in the southern area soon after the war ended shows the post-traumatic stress of the returning soldiers to the forces. All communities, classes, and castes have been affected in one way or another in this post-independent Sri Lanka. I think Soraya put it very nicely. It is a cesspit of hurt to everybody, man, woman, and children, There has been wars, insurrections, murders, torture, killings, violence, which has left a large consignment of collective trauma. Be it women or men or children, all are carrying wounds in their hearts and minds, and the violation of dignity of humanity. Successive riots and wars have crippled the economic structure and set our country back in the world scene. Environment has taken a toll, and plundering resources like forests and rivers go unaccounted. Needless to say, finally, that the country as a whole needs to heal. But the challenge is we have to find ways and means of healing hearts and minds of people and address the environmental degradation and build back the economic infrastructure of the country. Thank you, Carol. Sorry for the sister.
No, it was fascinating listening to you going through this whole list. And I thought to myself, we forgot those who were also, it was a kind of violence against the burghers when this language issue was introduced. And burgher people left by the horde. You know, I was at Tiriyaya with a friend of mine whose father was who was a warden for Velikada jail. And she is a burgher girl who left these shores with her family when she was young. And when we went to buy the tickets, they said to her, you know, you're a foreigner, you have to pay the foreign fee. And she said, well, I'm a burgher. And she said in Sinhala, I'm a perfect Sinhala. She said, I'm a burgher and I'm white looking, but you know, have you not heard of the burgers? And sadly, these people at the ticket counter had not heard about the burgers. And she said, you know, mage tatta tamai Velikada jail ke warden hitiye, you know. Mr. Jordan was the warden there. So it's amazing how these are like a forgotten people. So there's many forms of violence, as you introduced and said, even the tsunami and everything else that has happened subsequently. All these are forms of violence. And, you know, if we don't start healing, there is no hope for this country. And I think we women have to play this lead role in this healing effort. Now on to Fazana. Fazana is a behavior specialist. And healing Sri Lanka's core socio-economic issues, how women play a critical role. Fazana, give us your insights, please.
Thank you, Carol. Sylvie, that was fabulous. And I think it's apt that I take on from there, because if we look at the next generation of youth and children, how are we going to see that this country heals in the long term? What the aspect I'm looking at is what I call our colossal shame. The largest GDP that's earned, foreign income that's earned, is contributed by our women who are slaving away in other countries as housemaids. So labor export is the main source of foreign exchange earning for Sri Lanka. Women form 52% of this. And when they migrate, many of them leave behind their children who face abuse and neglect as a result. Today, 29% of the GDP of Sri Lanka is contributed directly by women, as against 11% in Pakistan, 18% in India, and 19% in Bangladesh, which means that Sri Lanka is generally ahead of the South Asian region. Of this, worker remittances constitute an important component of the balance of payments accounts. And I did a study in 2017 where the foreign exchange earnings from worker remittances stood at 7.2 billion, well ahead of other major foreign exchange earners, such as apparel, which was 5 billion, and tourism, which was 3.9 billion. And as a share of GDP, worker remittances accounted for 8.6%. And more interestingly, worker remittances alone covered 96% of the trade deficit. Now, this is a shame. This is the healing that I want to talk about, more from an economic perspective. Are women going to continue to slave away in other countries and send money for this country to have foreign income? Can't we do other foreign direct investments? What are our leaders doing without attracting the right kind of investment to this country so that our women can work here and come back home in the evenings? Because the next point that I want to get to is the harm in the household, the sociological aspects. The harms experienced by children left behind include disruption to family relations, diversion from education as children are pressured into domestic roles, formally discharged by the absent parent. Sometimes you find the eldest daughter being the mother and her schooling is disrupted. Psychosocial effects of loneliness and abandonment, and a heightened risk of child labor or abuse from alternative carers. This is very common. I mean, I serve on the board of an organization which helps with sexually abused girls. And this is very common when the mothers go away. Sometimes it's their own kith and kin, the men in the family, who abuse them. So there were many studies commissioned by the Sri Lankan government on the psychosocial issues arising from labor migration. And it has been clearly noted that a mother's migration for 2 or more years seriously affects a child's personality development. And, you know, the love, attention, and proximity of a mother cannot be replaced by other caregivers, however best they may be. So in estimate, 77% of the children are experiencing loneliness, according to a study that I read. For boys too, yeah? It's not only for girls. I mean, just because we are wisdom women, it's not about that. So what I want to link is to Selvi's talk about how can we heal Sri Lanka, even politically, all these riots you spoke about, if we are bringing up children in a household without mothers, and they are abused, and they are used as a violent force. So even for the boys, lack of good role models, especially for the boys, was identified as a difficulty faced in steering their lives in an appropriate direction. Fathers and male relatives abused narcotic drugs or alcohol, gambled, and had extramarital affairs and lacked regular employment. So obviously the boys see these people as their role models. So in essence, left behind children of migrant women workers in Sri Lanka have many difficulties resulting from the mother's absence. Their strengths to face life's challenges comparatively seem minimal. As migration of Sri Lankan women for overseas employment continues to thrive, appropriate and tangible policy is required to ensure that migration of women does not impact adversely on their left behind children. Or this country has to find alternatives so that we have a better generation of the future that comes into this country, so that they can be a healing force and not add to the violence that this country has gone through so far. Thank you, Karen.
So thanks, Fazana. You know, I was listening to a politician a few years ago saying, you know, we have to be happy, you know, our women bring so much money into this country, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, you know, on the backs of women, you're willing to make money for the country on the backs of women, but they don't have a voice. They don't have a voice in the public forum. And, you know, women's voices are hushed up even in homes. And as Fazana said, a lot of these cases, you know, these boys and girls who are left behind are not nurtured properly. So, you know, what do you expect then? Because there's half a parent who's missing, and the other half maybe, you know, maybe there's some good fathers out there, but you just cannot do this job for a whole country all by yourself. And it's important that we look at alternate employment sources, as Fazana said. You know, it's so many years ago they created a garment industry in this country. Is it perfect? Maybe not for the young girls, but on the other hand, it brings income to the country. Since then, what is the industry that has been set in this country that is available to everybody, and available not here in Colombo, but available in their area, so they don't have to travel far away from their home to earn a living? And I mean, it's quite all right for women to go out and earn a living and contribute to the well-being of the family. But, you know, I think successive governments have failed in creating industry across the country. And that, I think, is something we need to look forward to. Thanks, Fazana.
You're muted, Carol.
Carol, you're muted.
Can you unmute yourself?
So we go on to Kamini now. Kamini works on gender-based violence issues. She's a specialist there. And Kamini wants to talk about healing at an individual level, which has a ripple effect. Kamini?
Thanks, Carol. So I wanted to talk about, okay, so how do we actually overcome trauma? And all of us have been speaking about how we're so traumatized and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. So if you take it as a step-by-step process, for different people, it can mean different things. We try to create a space to acknowledge our trauma. We start looking at it, we process it, we may seek support. We usually express our hurt towards the person who perpetrated with the hope that it won't happen again. Sometimes we try to hold the person accountable, we forgive, and we can also develop a sense of resilience to overcome hurt and pain. So if you were to connect it to gender-based violence, studies show that it's not only women, men, or transgender people who suffer from the long-term effects of GBV, but their children too. Boys who experience child abuse or witness their mothers being abused have a higher likelihood of perpetrating violence, not only with their partners, but in their communities as well, as against those who have not had these experiences. And this has been highlighted in some studies in Sri Lanka. And at a scientific level, it's also been proven how trauma actually changes the structure of our cells and is passed on from generation to generation. There are examples from, say, the Irish famine, where generations later, even though there was food security, there was fears of food insecurity and depression. And also, if you look at the Native Americans, looking at the harm and abuse that they've experienced at a state level, it's been carried on to generations. So coming back to Sri Lanka and looking at GBV, for example, we have high levels of impunity, perpetrators of sexual violence, including rape. Amongst them, only about 2% have actually faced any legal consequences. So then what does this do to survivors? It's repeated, fear of repeated violence, trauma, difficulty of healing from it, frustration. And as I discussed earlier, it also affects children, especially males who have either experienced child abuse or seen it. And in most mass shootings in USA, they found that most of the perpetrators were perpetrators of domestic violence also. DV, domestic violence, does not happen in isolation. It is a continuum of violence, which goes from home to community to society. So unhealed trauma can become cyclical, as we are seeing, until deeper level healing takes place. So if a country does not take the issue of GBV, for example, seriously, where can people go to seek services, to heal, for counseling, legal support? And individually, if we are not willing to listen with empathy and without judgment, where will they go? So this shows an example of the connection between the state and personal healing processes. And also I would like to talk about the criminalization of homosexuality in Sri Lanka, how it affects people. I had an amazing friend who was an advocate of HIV and people's rights. He was gay as well. And I recollect my last conversation with him weeks before he died. He was broken because his partner had stolen all his money, and terribly, he had no recourse, no legal recourse, because homosexuality is criminalized in Sri Lanka. And we found out later on that he had stopped taking his treatment for HIV, and he died of opportunistic infections. As a country, we perpetuate this pain and loss through criminalization, through lack of recognition of pain. And if we cannot heal individually, the ripple effects are unhealthy relationships, which go into communities and to societies. And just to leave with a positive note, and I think we'll discuss this more later, is how have women changed things? Historically, the women's movement, or women individually, pushed for recognition of gender inequalities, pushed for service provision, and for processes to change legislation. I mean, Carol is one great example. She was a co-founder of Women in Need, and it's become the largest service provider in Sri Lanka on domestic violence. And the women's movement also created a space to listen, to promote and provide services for children's issues, LGBT issues, and also men's own experiences of violence. So that's what I want to say for now.
Thank you, Kamini, for now. I like that addition. You know, the hurt doesn't go away. People don't stop hurting unless there are efforts made to approach them and help them with the healing. You know, a sorry goes a long way. You know, sometimes walking in somebody else's shoes show us what it is to be in that position. You know, I always say race, gender, religion, all these things are an accident of birth. You know, if you're born next door into a Sinhala family, you know, would you be treated differently then? So it's just an accident of birth that we are in this position. So if we appreciate and learn to walk in each other's shoes, maybe there will be less anger and you know, frustration meted out to each other. We'll go to Kyra now. Kyra works to promote social justice. She's a mindfulness and well-being teacher. So Kyra talks about ceremonies of healing, power of creating public rituals to grieve, mourn the unacknowledged, and the casualties of war. I think this is so, so important. Kyra, over to you.
Thank you, Carol. What I'd like to share first, actually, is a beautiful example from the United States honoring historical trauma and unacknowledged pain in the history. This is an example of, so you all may be familiar with the history in the United States, particularly African-American men and women, but there would be mobs usually in the South, but it happened all throughout the country, that would take a Black person, for the most part, was completely innocent of whatever the crime was, and would kill them through hanging or all sorts of torture, and then some kind of death, which would be a public spectacle. And there would be photos, there would be souvenirs, like taking the person's finger, as a souvenir. Postcards would be made. I mean, it was level, this, and children would be brought to watch the killing. I mean, it was a really, really sick, very tragic aspect of our history. And then it got covered over, much like, this panel are talking about how history tends to be forgotten, and then it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. So there's a wonderful activist lawyer, bodhisattva named Brian Stevenson. This is an African-American lawyer who studied at Harvard and went to Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, and started the Equal Justice Initiative. And one of the things he's done, after a lot of his work was trying to get people who were innocent off of death row, because 1 in 9 people is killed on death row, and they're innocent later, they're proven innocent. So it's a very huge margin of error. So he created, with his organization, a lynching memorial. So they went to every site where they had historical proof that a lynching happened there, and they collected the dirt in a glass jar, and they wrote the name on the jar of the person who was lynched. Sometimes it was a whole group of people that would get lynched, like in a riot, a whole family would get killed, or 30, 40 people would be massacred. So they'd take the soil, put the names on the jar and the date and where, and then you come to the museum and there's just a wall full of hundreds, jars of different places where lynchings happened. Now, at least they've documented 3,000 of these lynchings happened across the whole country, mostly in the South, but even in California and Ohio, in the north of the United States. So what they've done is they've created these walk through, and each lynching is honored in a coffin-sized piece of metal that's hanging from this structure that you walk through. And so there's thousands of these coffin-shaped, with the names of who was lynched and where and when. And here's what I find is so brilliant about this. They made a copy of each one that sits outside. Once you come through and you've walked through all of this remembering of people who were killed, who never have been remembered before in the whole history of the United States. Most of these lynchings got completely covered over. So then you see a copy of each of these beautiful, metal memorials. And that copy is to invite this county where the lynching happened to come and take it for free and install it where the lynching happened, in their place. So it's kind of a challenge to every county where this happened. Come and acknowledge the history lived, where you live, So some counties have come and taken, and you'll see across the United States now, there are places where people are beginning to to say, yes, we need to acknowledge this very dark, very brutal history. Get repeated, because if we cover it over, it's like a wound that festers. And if we keep trying to cover it with more and more plaster, it won't heal. We have to uncover it and acknowledge this did happen, and let the air come, and let the body heals itself when we let it, and our psyches will heal the conditions they need. And part of that is the truth. We need to know the truth. We all know when we're not being told the truth. This registers very early on as a child. If your parents aren't important that happened to them, you internalize that something is wrong with you, and it's all unconscious. So until these traumas, until these histories, until these memories are allowed to come up and be acknowledged and healed, they will get passed on and passed on and passed on. And we, the generations from us will find themselves in violent, in self-destructive situations, and they don't even know why. And it's because of inherited trauma that has not been acknowledged, that hasn't been healed. And it can be healed, but it takes courage and it takes compassion. Brian Stevenson, Equal Justice Initiative, this is not a hateful, a judgmental, it is about healing everyone, not just the victims, but everyone is a victim. If you think of what sickness it would take, all of those white people to come celebrate torturing and killing someone who's totally innocent. They're victims of that racism too, not just the people who were being lynched, right? So everyone needs healing. And maybe in the next part, I can share a specific example of ceremonies of healing from my time in Vietnam, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Kyra. As you know, we changed our format a little bit so that we encourage, some cross conversations, as well as, taking questions from the viewers. There's one question I would like to address before we move further. Actually, it's a comment that was made by Tilak. And he says, these politicians have created a serfdom amongst the farmers who are always indebted to other people, and they're always, taken loans, their crops failed, and they owe somebody. And a lot of the cases, 8 to 9 million of them, their wives are sent off to the Middle East, and they have no chance of getting out of this debt situation. And then they're only created so that, everybody, it's a talking point at political events. And it's a talking point to bring them also to vote with false promises, and year after year, they put this faith in the government who's promising them various things, but they're constantly kept at this same level by the serfdom that has been created. So, Soraya, do you want to say something to that, or you want to move on? I mean, he was actually making a point rather than asking a question. If not, we need to talk about how we go to heal and how women can play this huge role. Thanks, Soraya.
Oh yes, absolutely. So one of the greatest enemies to healing. Now the mind knows we need to heal. The country knows we need to heal. But what is in our way is that we lack support. We lack personal commitment. And in the absence of very specific policies and procedures, all our panelists spoke to that. Fazana spoke about women's slaving away in the Middle East. What is the policy we have that these women can be given some help within Sri Lanka so that they can start their own businesses, they can find a job? This is foundational, critical, that we move out of this serfdom. That means not only self, it takes a village, the government, community institutions, local and national. We must all play a role in doing this, because this is not a simple issue. For 70 years, we have struggled with national unity. For 70 odd years. Because why? Because we are very happy where we are. and we think somebody else has to do the work. So my whole thing to the message to women and men is, if you write a list of to-do things every day, right on top of the list should be doing something for national unity. Whether it be you removing enemy images of your neighbor, that's important. Or whether you walk across to your community and ask, is everything okay? Let's meet this Sunday and talk about issues that's impacting our community. These are little things. You don't need lots of money or resources, just some commitment and time. And it's critical.
So, yeah, thanks, Soraya. You know, I want to take another question actually, because for one, Tina has said, you know, what you speak of has to be a part of a larger movement, a wave that pushes for collective change across and at a national level. And I think that's what we women are hoping to do. We are in this for the long run, and we want to ensure that we take it to another level, but we also need other people, you know, joining us with their support. For one, she has asked another question, that is the regeneration of hurt and anger that surround us. How can we dig deeper to look at the actual root causes that drives the people to keep moving without having empathy and compassion to make a collective change? I mean, how do we dig deep to address this root cause? Selvi, do you want to address that question? You have
That's a very difficult question. Thank you, Tina, for that question. What we need to do, of course, is heal hearts and minds. Hearts and minds of people in Sri Lanka. Not one community or the other, but all of them, because all of them have suffered in one way or another. Now, there are so many ways in which, you know, you could actually do this at the national, the regional, the local, the home level. I think Soraya was talking at the local home level, how we could do this. But our problem is a national problem. So I think the government really needs to become aware of the need to do this. First of all, we need to get the fear of violence, which has been ingrained into people's bodies and hearts and minds, out. The fear of violence. People don't, I mean, even today, people don't talk because there's fear of violence. There are fear of white van. There's a fear of this and that. So first of all, we have to remove that. And I don't know the answers for that, but that is very, very important. Secondly, there is also so many ways in which, you know, it could be a collective way of coming together for the women. And although there are so many ways in which it can be done, I'm going to suggest a very simple, direct way that I think it can be solved. And this is coming from my experience by working with the female-headed households in the North. I feel that in order to get the women on board, in order to see that the women take the lead on this, we have to start with all the female-headed households in the country. North, south, east, west, doesn't matter. But just all of the female-headed households, because I know that female-headed households have got a lot of responsibility on their heads, on their shoulders. And I think we need to find a way of giving them an income, a basic income, which will take them through their lives, to bring their children up, to give them food and education and take them out. I think that is actually the ABC of starting with women. We have to first empower the female-headed households with some basic income. And
thanks, Elvi. Sorry, I know we are going through so much that we have to bring out. But we also need to carry on with some more questions that we are coming. And I agree with you about the income, you know, I mean, that's why one of the reasons why I build these houses for women-headed households, you know, quite often. Kamini, you had something on your mind.
to talk a bit, I mean, there's no straightforward answer, I think. I think it's different at very different levels and for different communities and different groups. I think there's an important need for accountability, for holding organizations, states to be accountable for their actions. We're very bad at that. And I think we see a lot of women's movements and a lot of groups also pushing for accountability. And as women, as groups, I think we need to also step up and support these groups. I think another thing is we're talking about, primarily healing at a mental level. And there's so much stigma around mental health, accessing services. And I think we take the lead and we talk about it openly. You break through that stigma. And also, I mean, in the process of when you're talking about healing, you also have to really have honest conversations with yourself about our own attitudes of discrimination of other people. It is very real. Sometimes you have that looking at yourself very honestly can be a very painful process, but it has to happen if you really want to, have a sustained. Your healing also affects other people positively. And also my last point is healing is usually something women advocate. It's more of a feminine principle. And I think men have to step up and also acknowledge that men also need to heal. Men experience a lot of, we call it costs of having to play the masculine role. And we know a lot of issues around mental health issues that they also experience. And of course, I spoke about it about GBV. So acknowledging men's role and men's ability to also step up and talk about the need of using their privilege and networks to get men to also start talking about the need to heal and move it forward. Those are some of my suggestions.
Yeah, Fazana, you were saying something, Fazana. I think there was a question from Fazli, which said forgiveness and compassion, which are certainly great healers, should not be allowed to be taken as a weakness. I mean, and treated as and misused. Fuzzy?
Yes, and I think my comment was for his next comment, which was children need to be nurtured from birth to understand and believe in empathy. Adults will need a totally different approach. So as you all know, children from zero, from the time they are conceived until about 8 years is when their synapses open. And that's why we focus a lot on early childhood care and development, which is in Sinhalese we call it Mul Lama Vyasa. So it's only after 8, basically their foundation is kind of formed. So all the stimuli that we give a child or the mother while the child is in the womb is very important, the kind of brain stimulation that we make. So that's what I was telling Fazli. You can imagine a home where a mother is slaving away, and not only that, the rest of the caregivers are not the ideal role models for a child. So this is where, like you rightly said, Carol, this country has to really have a program, and I fully agree. One of our presidents, I think, thought through it when he had the garment factories, but that didn't sustain in many cities. But if that was so, I think a woman could have their dignity and, like Selvi also said, have some economic independence and go to work and come back and run a home as well. Even today, I want to share this example. I do a lot of hiking and a lot of camping. And once about last August, when we camped in Knuckles, the campsite was managed by a company, and it was very high up in the mountains. And it was the women in that village who carried all the camping gear, the gas cookers, the gas cylinders, and everything possible up the mountain. And I asked the organizers, where are the men? He said, I don't know, but these women are the ones who come forward and work. So they work, they run a home. I mean, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, this is why I say if the women don't go to Saudi mainly or other countries where they go, and what do they earn? I mean, honestly, they don't earn much. Their quality of life would be much better even if they earn half of that. And I bet you not, they could earn more if we had some good social entrepreneurship projects. And these are my passion areas. This is what I do anyway. Yeah.
Thanks, Fazana. I wanted Soraya to answer this question from Shammi. She says different Sri Lankan religions practice prayer where we wish for the well-being of our ancestors in the afterlife. Or Kyra, maybe you want to answer. I can see Kyra reaching out. So and an extension of this towards our forsaken victims. So
Yes. I really appreciate this suggestion, Chami, that, you know, the power of prayer and the Sri Lankan culture, it's already very deep in the culture, this understanding that we can communicate with our ancestors through prayer, and that basically all those that have passed on are still somehow with us, and especially those that die tragic ways, they may still be needing our support to fully complete their healing. So we have a role to play for them. They have a role to play for us. So I'd like to share an example that I lived that was very powerful of ritual and ceremony for healing from the war in Vietnam. And it's just shared as something inspired me, but of course in every culture and every place we need to find ways that are appropriate to that culture. But this was when I was a monastic. My teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, 40 years for calling for peace during the time when the US was fighting in Vietnam. And finally, he was allowed back into the country. He came 3 different times. And on the second visit, we did 3 ceremonies of healing in the north, the center, and the south. So in Hanoi, in Hue, and in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City. And these were 3-day-long ceremonies. They were called Grand Requiem Masses. And the idea was to pray for everyone who had died, everyone who had lost someone, regardless of whether they were from the north, from the south, because, you know, there was the war between the north and the south in Vietnam. So it was praying for everyone without discrimination. So what people were invited to do was to share who they had lost and when and where. And then it was just paper after paper after paper stapled on these huge altars in these temples. And this would be to this 3-day ceremony in each place. And so we'd be chanting through the night for 3 days, who were brought in to teach and share chants, and they had their mudras and bells and instruments, and the monks and nuns were there, and there was food offerings, and it was an extremely powerful event. It was the first time in the history of the country, you know, this was 40 years after the war time, or maybe 30 years. It was the first time people were allowed to publicly grieve their loved ones, many of whom they didn't know where or how they died. They just knew when, you know, then they never came back. So the government hadn't allowed that kind of public acknowledgement. And so these ceremonies were the first time people could say, I lost this person, and have the collective energy channeled toward that person, each in, you know, each in their own way, because we were all praying for everyone without discrimination. And but on the 3rd day, the last day of each time we did this 3 times, it always rained, the sense of this rain of compassion, you know, and other things happened that were very hard to explain from a rational perspective, sort of supernatural things. But I had the sense, and many other people, that people who had passed away, their energies really came, and they were present, and they wanted to be healed, and there was a big release that was happening. So I've thought of, after that experience, I thought, oh, we must do this in the United States. There's so much unhealed trauma and wounding. And so it comes up anytime I'm aware of, like, you know, histories, like Selfie was saying, that are sort of buried, and the new generation doesn't even know what's under their own feet, you know?
I think,
and so,
yeah.
I think also,
Sorry.
Kyra, talking about prayer, you know, Gandhi once said, prayer without heart is useless. Could you just tell us how we can bring our heart into this prayer? Because we pray a lot in Sri Lanka, but where is the heart in the prayer for everybody? Not people who are committed to this journey, but what is the message for people to pray with heart?
Yeah. I think it's really, it comes from the understanding that we're all connected, that your suffering is my suffering, your joy is my joy. When you heal, I heal. If you feel safe, then I feel safe. And that, you know, those who came before are in us now. We can't, who are we but those who came before us? We couldn't be here without all of our ancestors. So if we understand that we're made up of our ancestors, we'll see everyone else is made up of their ancestors. So if their ancestors, you know, went through deep wounds and suffering, we know they have that in them. We have that in us. So the prayer of the heart comes from this understanding of our fundamental interconnectedness, that we cannot be safe or happy if other groups in our country are not feeling safe or happy.
I'd like Kamini to say something, because, you know, she does these healing programs, right? Kamini, tell us, you know, this is really interesting, because I think this healing is so important, guys, right? Kamini, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours on it, but yeah, some of you know that I do energy healing. And I think stemming from what Kyra said, it stems from the fact, from the knowledge that we are all connected to each other. And what happens is that, you know, when you connect with another person's energy, or forget other people, okay, about ourselves, if you start becoming more self-aware, you start realizing that there's kind of an imbalance. Last week I was talking about how the mind, body, and soul need to be in balance, and you become more aware of these imbalances. But in the process of, say, energy healing or whatever there's labels for it, you start connecting with other people's energy around you, energy of the trees, of nature, and you realize how connected you are, and you actually can feel very healed. And say, when it comes to healing other people, to channeling this energy, when I speak with people, I realize that, you know, when I do the healing, I see a lot of people carrying a lot of guilt or trauma, or, you know, experiences they've had in their youth or even a few weeks ago, which blocks energy flowing. And when I do an energy healing session, it turns out to be more of a counseling session afterwards, because I'm talking with this person about this experience they've had. They felt so much shame that they haven't even spoken to others about it. And it starts healing at a mental level, which affects the body and the mind.
Physical.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just a snapshot, but yeah, I mean, if anyone else also has something to add.
Yeah, thanks. You know, unfortunately, as we have come to the end of the show, we have so much to say and discuss. But gosh, we just have time for Soraya to give us a call to action for the week. And just to remind everyone, you know, please send some of your questions in online as well on Facebook to us, so we can continue this discussion even on Facebook, guys, right? We are not going to ignore your questions. So just time is just so precious. I mean, Soraya, you want to give us a call to action before I tell them about next week?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for this opportunity. You know, every day we all have the opportunity to be God. The difference between good and God is the letter O. So when it comes to national unity and building women, families, and women's movements who will address this issue of national unity, we have to understand that we have to have a maniacal passion for this. You can't eat, drink, or sleep until you have done just one thing for national unity. It's not a cloak you wear, okay, I'm going to hate today, I'm going to hurt tomorrow, I'm going to heal tomorrow, the day after. No, it is a passion that you have to be driven. And this is serious, because last night I was speaking to my cousin in Kandy, and she said her mother is a diabetic and who was not feeling well. 3 doors next was a doctor. Her husband, my friend, cousin's husband, had gone to the doctor and said, can you please come and take a look at auntie, she's sick. And the doctor refused. And the last time I was in Sri Lanka doing some reconciliation work, the Buddhist clergy, who has always been so open to communicating, they said to me, "Ane apita nang Muslim ayat ekka katha karanda deyak naha." And I go to the Muslim community, they say, "Oh, we can't do anything. They're not going to accept it." So there's so much hurt and there's so much fear. So the call to action is write down something, because when we write, we work towards goals. Write something and take little action. You don't have to heal Sri Lanka. Heal yourself, heal your home, heal your community. And I'm not talking from some idea, but I do that every day. So make it a way of life, because together we can heal. Thank you.
Thanks, Soraya. So guys who's watching in, please pass the word around. I think we need more people participating in this conversation. And we, as a panel, we are hoping to continue with this because we all have the passion and the drive, and we are going to make the time to do this. But we do need your support. And guys out there, you know, we are going to bring you in someday, because I mean, without you, we can't do much, right? So at the end of the day, with your support, we women can look to the divine woman. I think we have something about that on our Facebook page as well, because Kyra was very interested in talking about that issue. There's a series of documentaries that are being done. Just watch, you know, there's always something interesting out there. We learn something every single day. So the next week on the 20th, the next week on the 20th is our next forum, and it's about liberating the feminine, patriarchy, power, and paradigm shifts. And that's all we are asking for, you know, these paradigm shifts that we can make a difference. We can make something happen. So next week, guys, thank you for watching us. Good night. God bless, and stay safe in this time. And we will also come through this whole period. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
So Kyra, can you close the waiting room, please?